Hey, Franchise Secrets. I'm super excited to have Jhana Li on. Now, she has been recommended to me by numerous people, and they keep saying, Erik, you've got to have her on the podcast. And so I was finally able to get her on, and we're talking operations, talking a little bit of visionary stuff, some leadership stuff, but mainly operations. Operations is not my greatest strength. And so I really interviewed her based on a lot of the entrepreneurial people, like what questions should we be asking somebody that understands operations. And so I think we helped a lot of visionaries out there, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of franchisees and franchisors that need ops people and need them to flourish in that role. So I hope you enjoy the show.
Representing Franchise Secrets, Erik Van Horn.
Jhana, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Erik. I'm really excited to be here.
Same here. So we got mutual friend, Justin
We do.
Donald. I saw that you were on his podcast, and he's got the Lifestyle Investor and Mastermind, and you helped that community out a little bit, didn't you?
Yep. I've done some coaching for them over at Lifestyle Investor. They're awesome.
I love it. And then Cameron Harold. I just had Cameron on the show, and I know that you know Cameron, and I love that guy.
Yeah, I know. I love that this is a small world. We found all these ways that we were already connected. We didn't even know it.
I try to find ops people because all ops people are smarter than me. Like, I'm a visionary. And anytime there's an integrator or an ops person, I want to learn from them. So whenever I get somebody like you on, I am here as a sponge, as someone to listen and learn and also provide perspective. And kind of where I want to start, like where my mindset is I was an entrepreneur 20 years ago, and I saw all the successful people that I thought were successful in franchising as really good at operations. I was a visionary marketing guy. And the more successful were operations. And I thought I need to be really good at operations. And so I was never really great at operations, and I thought I needed to be. And once I started to understand my own zone of genius, started to understand EOS or having a second in command or scaling up or giving operating person a place in the business and me taking my role, it really freed me up. So that's been my kind of journey over past 20 years. And I wish I would have discovered like the ops role versus the visionary role earlier in my career. But just so you know, that's where my mindset is. I don't know if you have any comments on that, or we want to go to how you got started in the business and being this operational guru that you are.
I guess I would just validate and kind of reflect that back to you, that I think the hardest part around being such a competent, fast learning entrepreneur is that you operate under the belief that you can figure everything out. And so you do, but the challenge then becomes what is worth figuring out, right? Like if you really applied yourself, Erik, you'd probably be a decent operator. But the question is it worth the time and energy it would take for you to develop that expertise? Or will you actually get to your goals faster by saying no to that entire skill set and just delegating it out entirely? And so what I'm hearing you say is that is a realization that you landed on, and you wish you'd landed on it earlier, of what is the value of your time? Just because you can learn it doesn't mean that you should.
Is it pretty common for visionaries to want to be an operator like that?
Again, I think it's almost more like default programming. I don't think anybody wants to be an operator, right? But we operate under the assumption that I have figured out everything else in my business. So why shouldn't or can't I figure this out? And again, it's a fair assumption. The only question is, how much is it going to cost you to go on the side quest that is learning operations and developing that side of your skill set, when in fact what your business needs is for you to stay in that visionary hat and just really double down and master that.
What's your zone of genius?
So it's interesting. I started squarely in the operations lane. And so my background, you asked about my background, I was the former COO for multiple different successful startups. I have been an operations coach for hundreds of different businesses. This is really, I've learned entrepreneurship through the side and the lens of operations and working with operators. I now run my own business, Spyglass Ops. And so really one of my biggest level ups, Erik, has been playing with this exact same question, but from the other side of it, which is I've historically been an operator. To what extent does my business need me or is asking me to step into the visionary role? And so I've kind of migrated in the opposite direction.
Operation, like COO, visionary. I don't know. What do you, so EOS is integrator, visionary. How do you, what terminology do you use?
Here's the thing. It's all just buzzwords, right? So I don't want anybody listening to get confused of like, are we talking about the same thing? Yes, we're talking about the same team. I think of these as two like energies, two lenses that get brought to bear at the highest level of the business. You've got the visionary energy and lens. That is your, charismatic, out in front, mission-based leader, leading the charge, attracting the talent, and getting the mission and the message out there. And then you've got the, call it whatever you will. I call it an operator, right? The operator energy. And they are there to take that vision and then reverse engineer it and actualize on it. They build the systems and the team, and they manage the day-to-day as required to make that vision come to life. So call them whatever you will. I would use the labels visionary and operator, but all we're talking about is a yin and a yang at the top of a business that by combining those superpowers, you're able to create a much larger whole.
So how does leadership come into play? Because you can have somebody that's really good at ops or really good being a visionary, but they've never had leadership training or leadership their leadership tested or exercise or even the opportunity to become a good leader. Maybe they were really good at operating a super small team, or maybe it's their own really small business, whether it's as a visionary or an operator. But how does someone like that become kind of more well-rounded as a leader?
It's a great question. Two ideas on this. Number one, none of us start as great leaders. And I think there is a big limiting belief. I certainly had this when I was first starting out and first stepping into a leadership role, where I'd never been a leader, like in school and in my childhood. Like there was no data to point to that said I was one of these natural born leaders. So therefore I must not be a good leader. And what I learned over time is that leadership, like anything else, is a skill. And, Erik, we were just talking about, is it worth learning this skill of operations? Maybe not, because you're going to make so much more money if you just double down as a visionary. But is it worth learning the skill of leadership? That's a different question. And I would say if you're planning on scaling or growing a business, the answer is a resounding yes. Leadership is an incredibly high leverage skill. Whether you're in the visionary hat or the operator hat, knowing how to invite and get the best out of people who follow you, it doesn't matter what hat you wear in a business. You will absolutely get an ROI on that skill. And so, again, it's a choice. There's plenty of terrible CEOs out there that are bad leaders and they still grow big businesses. There's a way of compensating for that weakness by putting amazing leaders around you, etc. But if we're just choosing what do we want to grow in, I would recommend leadership for anybody who wants to build a team that relies upon, or a business that relies upon a team.
Attention, franchisors and franchisees. There are two really important resources that I want to share with you that will help you avoid costly mistakes and increase your enterprise value. The first is our free Facebook group. It's a community that has over 4,000 franchisees and franchisors in it. When somebody asks a question, they get honest and authentic answers from multiple perspectives. You can join the group for free over at franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. The second resource I want to share with you is if you're a franchisee and you want to be around a community of successful Zs and other brands and in other industries, this is why I created the Franchisee Mastermind. If you want access to the best single and multi-unit owners to know what they're doing, or if you want to be around other multi-brand owners, then you'll want to check out my Franchisee Mastermind. The reason why people join is they want access to my Rolodex, my connections, to each other. They want a shortcut success, both short-term and long-term. Links will be in the show notes or at scalablefranchise.com.
Who are some people that you look up to as good leadership trainers or books or people to follow on podcasts or whatnot?
So probably the number one thought leader on leadership who really shaped my thinking was Liz Wiseman. She's got an incredible book called Multipliers. And that book absolutely messed me up. Like, it's one of the more confronting books you will read about how your best intentions are accidentally undermining the performance of your team. And I absolutely needed to read that book when I was early in my leadership journey, because I wanted to do so well. I wanted to serve my team. I really was this heart-centered leader, but I didn't realize how being so I should rephrase that. I didn't understand how me showing up in the way that I was accidentally undermining my team, and I needed that mirror held up to me.
How do you get your team to understand leadership or to want to grow as leaders? Or is that the visionary's role or the operator's role to really help them level up in leadership?
Yeah. So this is an interesting one, because I think it comes down to, who do you promote into leadership to begin with? One of the biggest mistakes that I see early entrepreneurs make is that they will promote the top performer of the department. So I see this all the time in sales, for example. Let's take our best closer and let's make them our head of sales, because they're the best closer. Therefore, they deserve the promotion, right? But the challenge is, what does a head of sales actually do? They do sales training. They audit sales calls. They look at sales data. They show up to leadership meetings. They do all of this stuff that has nothing to do with being an amazing salesperson. It actually takes them out of, I loved the phrase that you said earlier, their zone of genius, right? They're spending less time doing the thing they're amazing at and more time doing all this other stuff. And so the only time I will promote somebody internally into leadership is if I believe that they have not just the skill to be a great leader, but they actually have the motivation to be a great leader. They want to learn how to lead. They want to develop that skill set, even if they don't have it yet. Because I can take a person like that, and then, yes, to answer your question, I do think it is the responsibility of the CEO, the COO, to level up leadership within that business. But you have to have a willing student, versus if you take the top performer there, but they don't want to actually lead and manage, they just want to close all day, you're going to take them out of their zone of genius, put them into their zone of competence. And now you've not only lost an amazing salesperson, you have gained a mediocre manager. And there's no training that will solve for that, because they don't actually want to lead or manage people.
How do you see the visionary and the operator communicating, relating? Because Gina Wickman in EOS did a great job of kind of explaining that relationship. And I love listening to people that are outside of the EOS world explain things as well, like Cameron and others. So how do you see that relationship between the visionary and the operator, and how do they best work together? And what's some advice would you have for somebody that may have a stressful relationship?
So the best metaphor I ever heard for this came from one of my operations mentors, Leila Hormozi, and her husband, Alex, are like a famous kind of visionary operator pair. And they told me once, the visionary and operator are like the gas and the brake pedal of a car. You need both to drive the car safely, but they work in fundamental tension with each other. If it was all visionary, then we would just have like pedal to the metal, car would be going down the highway at 150 miles an hour, and inevitably it will crash. Something will explode. A wheel will come off, right? So you need the brake. The brake is the operator there to slow things down just enough that the car doesn't totally shake itself apart. But there's intrinsic tension between the gas pedal and the brake pedal, especially if both of those are pushing on the pedals at the same time, which in a business they are. And so if you're experiencing stress, either as a visionary or an operator, if you're experiencing stress in that relationship, the first thing I would say is, well, that's inevitable, right? Stop thinking about it as a bad thing, and instead ask yourself the question, is this tension healthy or not? Because that might be good or bad. Do we have a tension that is productive? Do we have a tension that keeps the car on the highway and keeps it safe while it's going as fast as possible? Or is our tension now, I'm working with a client where she's at an absolute standstill with her partner because the gas pedal can't understand why the brake keeps slowing things down. The brake pedal can't understand why the gas pedal keeps launching new ideas and wanting to move so fast. And they've lost respect for each other because they are perceiving each other as like an enemy, an antagonist, a barrier, as opposed to the counterpart, the person that is doing what they do because they love and respect the business, and holding that inherent tension is actually what's best for the business.
When do you think Alex and Leila Hormozi fully understood the difference between that visionary and operator role and some of the things that they may have learned. I've had Alex on the podcast a while ago. So a lot of respect for what those two are doing out there. And I've heard that she is just amazing at ops.
Yeah.
But, so
Yeah,
what
she's
would
a
you
monster.
say, the things that they've learned, some big lessons that they've learned?
Yeah, so I didn't work with them all the way back in the day when I'm sure they were figuring this out, but Leila did tell me a story once where her and Alex sat down with some expensive ops consultant. This is actually an exercise that I've taken and iterated on and walk my clients through now. And they essentially threw all of the things that they ever do, all of their tasks, their scope, their responsibility, they just threw it up on a whiteboard, they jumbled it up together. And then this consultant just went through one by one and drew, circles of different colors around each thing. What goes to Alex? What goes to Leila? What goes to Alex? What goes to Leila? Who is the best person to do this task? And he just drew a line in the sand, like quite literally just drew a line. And then they honored and respected the line. Because before that, they were really stepping on each other's toes. The water was so muddy because there was no clarity around who is the best person to do what. And in so many of the businesses that we work with, Erik, we see that exact same issue of like, you've got these incredibly talented leaders at the top of the business, but because they're so talented, because they're so good at doing so many things, they show up and they do everything, but then everyone's doing everything and we're accidentally stepping on each other's toes. And so one of these exercises that we'll do with bigger leadership teams is we'll just walk them through drawing lines in the sand and asking them the question, who is the best person to own this responsibility or function in the business based off of two variables. The first variable is their skill set and competency, right? Like you're probably going to be a better fit at doing marketing and sales deliverables than I will. I'll be better at doing team and operations deliverables than you will. So who's the best fit based off of competency? But then the second one is important. The second one is, and the value of their time, right? As a CEO of your company, you might be the best person to do so many things. You've got the skills and competencies to fill so many hats across the business. But the value of that hat is not a match for the value of your time. Therefore, you are not the best person. And if you can push that downward to a middle manager or even a frontline employee, where the value of their time is matched for the value of the task, they are the best person, even if they do it 10% worse than you do it. So with those two frameworks, right, skill and competency and then value of your time, you're able to draw lines in the sand. But that's incredibly powerful because, sorry, I'm just ranting now, so stop me if this is not what you meant with this question. Have you ever played like beach volleyball, Erik?
Yes, that's where I tore my meniscus. So yeah, keep going. Great.
Oh no. Okay.
Great one there.
Okay. Sorry.
Yep,
Sorry to bring up bad memories. Okay, great. So when in beach volleyball, that ball is coming down and it's coming down exactly between you and that other person. And you lock eyes and you're like, are you going to get it? Am I going to get it? Oh, I got it. And then the ball hits the floor. That happens in business all the time, right? There's a ball that's dropping directly halfway between your responsibility and my responsibility. We both have the skills or competencies to do it, but because neither of us have taken ownership for that ball, we assume that the other person's got it and then it drops. And so the power of drawing lines in the sand is that now if that ball is even 1 inch to one side, we know whose job it is to take that ball and run with it. And the net dropped balls within the business will go down dramatically when you have that kind of role clarity.
How do you put a price or a framework on the value of time? I know you can just take your salary or your take home pay divided by 2,000 and there's kind of the value, but how do you kind of work with people to understand that and then actually work within the framework that you just discussed?
So what you're talking about is called effective hourly rate, right? So how much does my business pay me divided by the number of hours I work? That's what an hour of my time is worth. I prefer a slightly different metric. I made it up, but I call it effective hourly value. And it's different from effective hourly rate in that effective hourly value is how much potential value could you bring to the business with your skills and your human potential and everything that you're capable of? How much value could you bring to the company? That is significantly more than your rate, right? Hopefully, your company should be paying you down here compared to the potential value of what you can bring. But I love this metric because you have an EHV as the CEO. Your EHV is the highest in the business, but so does everybody else on your team. Your operator has an EHV that's slightly below you. Your C-suite has an EHV that's slightly below you. And I can match, I can quantify if a task is a match for the value of the person. And if somebody is capable of delivering value up here, but they're stuck in the weeds doing tasks where the value is down here, that opportunity cost, that gap is loss to the business. I can quantify that loss, right? I know that with all of your time being spent on your highest value activities, you would move the company forward by X amount relative to the value of the task that you're actually doing. And so I use EHV as a metric to quantify not just the CEO's time and help them understand where should your time be going. And the reason for that, Erik, is that, let's take you and me as an example. Your highest EHV activities are going to be in sales and marketing, right? Those are super value add to the company, but you're also uniquely skilled at them. Versus for me, my EHV in sales and marketing is lower because it's not where my natural born, that's not my zone of genius, it's not my skill set. So my EHV is better spent in operations and team building deliverables. If we were just going off of hourly rate, the hourly rate of sales and marketing is really high. Therefore, I should be doing it. But it doesn't take into account what my unique value contribution to my business might be.
So where does emails, like I got 250 emails in my inbox right now that are unread, much less the ones that haven't, that I'm trying to do something with. And I don't like it. And I'm getting ready to try to do something about that. I have friends that, been deep into Dan Martell stuff with buying back your time. And a lot of people talk about, let's hire someone to manage your inbox. And I'm scared to do that. But I was looking at that and I was starting to like time myself on how much time it takes through just going through things that I don't even really need to be touching. And there's some things that are like that on my schedule today that are 8 minutes a day. But then you start to take that out over a year and that adds up. And emails is way more than that. So we're talking about the effective value. I'm doing some really low value stuff. How do you help somebody like me with that?
Here's a quick exercise that you can do and that anybody listening can do. Grab a spreadsheet and time audit yourself every 15 minutes for 3 days. Set an alarm, a reminder on your computer or on your phone, goes off every 15 minutes, and you literally just write down what you're doing. Don't look at it, don't judge it, don't analyze it, just write it down for 3 days. That's a snapshot. That's a day in the life for you, right? Or 3 days in the life. Then go back through that list and assign 1 through 5 effective hourly value. It's a gut check, and that's totally okay. 1 through 5. What is the effective hourly value of you answering your emails? 1, 2, probably somewhere in there. Versus, the effective hourly value of hopping on a podcast. Maybe that's a 3 or a 4. The EHV of speaking from a stage, that's a 5, right? So you can just start to, I like 1 through 5 because you don't bog yourself down thinking about it too hard. It's just like, where is it? 1 through 5. And then sort the list with 1s at the top all the way down to 5s at the bottom. When it comes to getting these things off your plate, the 1s and the 2s are where you're going to find the highest gains back. These are the things that are taking up the most amount of your time and providing the least amount of value to the business. If you were to free up 5 hours a week spent on 1s and 2s and reallocate that into 4s and 5s, you have created value. You've taken that same amount of time and you've made more happen with it. That is value add to the business. So you look at those 1s and 2s and you have 4 options, Erik. EADS. E stands for eliminate. Does that need to happen? Maybe it actually just doesn't need to happen. E is best case scenario. You just take that thing off the list. You don't have to do it. Nobody has to do it. It just goes away. Why do we even do that anymore anyway? A stands for automate. Automate is cool. Someone's going to have to spend some upfront time building an AI around this or setting up an automation around this. It's going to take time, but then nobody is ever going to have to do it ever again. That's the next best option. D is delegate. Maybe a human being really does need to do this, but then we go back to our 2 questions. Who is the best person to do this with their competencies and the value of their time? And then lastly is S, streamline. Maybe you do have to do it, but there is a more efficient way of getting it done. So you go through your 1s and your 2s, you assign an EADS, you give that to your operator, and then you just let them go to work for you. Get all of that stuff off your plate. And that is how we would help somebody like you. Does that make sense, Erik?
Makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hopefully next time we talk, I'll have that off of my plate because I have friends that have done that successfully, and if they can do it, I can do it. All right. So are most of the people that you work with, there are a lot of people that you work with, do they start out, are they the visionaries or the founders or the entrepreneurs that need help with operations? Is that, and so you find that they come to you and they're like, we need some help. How do you help them? Is it identifying that operator? Is it helping them train that operator? Like, give us a sense of that visionary that's screaming like, I'm at the end of my rope. I need help. And it's probably ops. Like, how do you help that person? Let's help them. Let's help some people.
Let's help some people. So let me tell a story because I think that's probably going to be the best way to understand this. You'll know that you're this visionary if a couple of things are true. Number one, you feel like you are spending your day-to-day just buried in the weeds of your business. You're listening to this episode and you're like, oh my God, my time is mostly ones and twos, right? I'm doing all this low value stuff. It's not bringing a lot of growth to my company, but I don't know how to get out of this position. All of this stuff needs to get done, and I don't know how to not be the person to do it. We had a client where they had a whole team, like they built out a team, but they felt like their team was underperforming, like they couldn't trust their team. And so they spent most of their time just like herding cats, just managing their team and making sure their team was doing the right things, right? So effectively, it was as if they were doing them themselves. So we take those visionaries that are stuck in that space, and the company that they run has started to suffer. Like the growth is suffering because the primary value driver, that's you, the founder, can't do value driving activities. And so the business is growing less. It's either stalled out, stagnated, it's roller coastering, or it's slowing down. And that's the moment in time where we step in. We start all of our client relationships with a company-wide operational audit. So we will get into the business for a full week and identify what needs to come off your plate. Why are these things trapping you in the day-to-day weeds? Where do you have gaps in your team or your leadership that you can't trust these things to come off? Where are your systems broken or things could be automated, right? So we're doing an analysis around the highest priority bottlenecks that are holding you back today, as well as peering into the crystal ball and saying, hey, based off of where you want to grow, you want to 3x your company. Cool. Well, we've worked with companies at 3x your size. We know exactly what's going to get in the weeds or like what's going to break. So here are the things that you're going to need to build next. And the result of this audit is a 12-month roadmap. It literally breaks down step by step by step. Here are the exact operational bottlenecks and the order in which they need to be cleared. So that's step one. One of those items that we're looking at is always the operator. Do you have the right second in command who can then take this roadmap and execute on it? If you don't have that person, we can turn around and recruit them for you. We can do that in 60 days or less. If you do have that person, why haven't they already done this? If you've got the right person in the role, what's blocking them? Is it bandwidth? Is it skill and knowledge? What do they need to be the operator that your business deserves? And if you do have that person, we have a training program where we will level them up. We will clear those blockers and then work through them to execute on the roadmap that we have laid out. Our goal, Erik, like the visionaries like you are our perfect clients because we want to work with people who need these things done in their business, but don't want to be the operator that goes out and gets it done. They want us to bring in that person and then work with their second in command directly to make it happen.
How do people find you? And if they are interested in something like that, so I was going to do this at the end, but like since we're talking, how do people find you? And like if they want to work with you or get some help, what do they do? And then I have a question for you after that. That's really about some of the ugly things that you discover with teams that are doing things wrong or mismanaging that the visionary never knows about. So, but first of all, how do people find you?
Okay. Well, probably the best way actually to get in touch with me, guys, is just directly on Instagram at the Jhana Li. You can get all of my free ops value add there. You can DM me and we'll set you up on a call with my team. That's the best way to get in touch.
Perfect. All right. So like I've seen this franchisees and franchisors, like there's the visionary founder and like life is good for them. They're making a good amount of money. They have a second in command that has a lot of like freedom to do their own thing. All of a sudden like the spotlights is shining on them, and they're like, oh, I had a call today. They're like, all of a sudden there's a franchisor that I had a call with today, and they said, Erik, we had this second in command that was doing so good for us, but then I hired a fractional CFO. Fractional CFO started shining spotlight. All of a sudden we realized there's some like vacations. There was a lot of food. There was a lot of travel. There was a lot of things that started happening. And all of a sudden spotlight was on them, realized that they were spending money on things they shouldn't have been. And then it just got worse from there as they started to uncover stuff, things that weren't being done, etc. So is that very common? Maybe not to that level. Maybe it is to that level, but what say you?
So I'll say that most of the clients that we work with are so buried in the day-to-day weeds that they may not know why these things are wrong, but they know what's wrong, right? You know when your team messes up because you have to get in there and fix it. You know when your team is taking too much vacation because you have to be the person that steps in and covers the gap and takes up the slack, right? So for the average client that we work with, Erik, the horror stories are not that bad. The horror stories are more like, I don't know how to get out of all of these bad things that I see breaking around me all the time. To the client that is shared in your example, they were so far removed. They went to the opposite side of the spectrum where they're like, cool, I've got this amazing operator. I now just get to fly away, and they've got it, right? But I always say delegation is not the same thing as abdication, right? People need leadership. And so we can delegate something, that's all well and good. We absolutely should do that. But that is different than fully abdicating the responsibility of being a leader and just flying away and trusting your team will have it. And the horror story that you're sharing is the worst case example of that, right? Like I flew away and then I came back and realized that they'd done all this stuff. And because because the company was still profitable, I didn't keep close enough attention. I didn't pay attention. And now all these things are coming clear. And so I think the happy medium is what we're trying to aim for here. I like to think of it as true delegation is evolving from a player on the field to a coach on the sideline. Think of any sports game that you've ever seen. That coach is locked in. That coach knows exactly what is going on the field. The only difference is when the other team has the ball, they aren't storming onto the field to try and run the play themselves, right? And so as a leader, the most effective leadership, I think, just looks like a coaching relationship where you may have your operator running these locations and they may be doing a great job, but we're still coaching them. We're still offering them the opportunity to grow and level up. We're still keeping an eye on their performance so that we can identify the gaps and where they have room for growth. And they're on board with that because they get a coach and they get to grow and they get to level up. And so it becomes this great win-win relationship. But when we go too far to the player side, we get stuck in the weeds. When we go too far off the field, we just end up as like a spectator in the stands. And now we have no idea what's going on.
How does that visionary coach an ops person well? Because a visionary is going to be thinking visionary stuff, and the ops person is going to be thinking differently. So how does that visionary effectively coach an ops person?
You can delegate it. You could delegate it to a company like mine where we have a coaching program where we will literally coach your operator for you. That's an option. Or you can build a relationship with your operator where you are, and this is true for anyone really, where you're defining the what, but then giving them autonomy over the how. You as a coach are telling them what success looks like. Here are the key performance metrics that this location needs to hit. Here are the key, here's the client happiness and employee happiness score that we want to go for. Here's profit and revenue. Here's what success looks like. And what you are giving to the operator, because let's be honest, you don't know how to do it, is they get to say, cool, here's how I'm going to make that happen for you. And where there is a gap, then we need to identify what's going on there. And that's where the active coaching takes place. But I think any great leadership 101 is, can you put all of your focus into what Reed Hastings, he's the former CEO of Netflix, he calls leading through context, not control. Context is, here's where we're going, and here's all the key information that you need to know to make the right decisions that will get us there. Control is, and now I'm going to jump in and I'm going to absolutely micro control every single decision you make, every single action you take, right? That's control. Versus context is, if we get the right person in the right seat, and we give them all of the supplementary information that they need, they will make the right decision. They will do the right action. I'm just giving them the context.
We're talking about like the communication and relationship between the operator and the visionary. What's the cadence of that communication? Like in EOS, I keep going back to EOS because I've had EOS implementers on here, and a lot of the audience is familiar with EOS. But so they have the level 10s, and then scaling up has a different way of doing it. So I'd love to kind of learn from people like you, like, because I don't think there's just one way to do it, or there might be a better way for different people to do it. So from a meeting standpoint, with the visionary and the ops person, what does a meeting look like? What's a successful meeting? What are some challenges or ways that those tend to not work?
First, I'll say, EOS is an incredible framework. Scaling up is an incredible framework. The challenge that I have with really rigorous frameworks like that is that it assumes a one size fits all. And I don't believe in a one size fits all. So the L10 meetings are fantastic, but the frequency at which those meetings take place, to me, is and always should be a resounding, it depends, right? I believe that frequency of meetings and communication should be a function of the rate of change within that business. Meaning, the faster that business or that piece of the business is changing, the tighter our feedback loop needs to become. Because the faster something moves, the easier it is for it to kind of like get off track, get off the wheels, and now all of a sudden we are sprinting in opposite directions and we didn't even know it. And so the frequency of your meetings should be a function of how quickly things are changing at that level or in that component of the business. If you're in some massive growth curve and you're used to only chatting with your operator, let's say once a month, but now things are going crazy and you're growing really, really fast, screw your once a month meeting, meet with them every week, right? Like that's the level of frequency that they need for just maybe the next 90 days. And then you can back it off again. So conversely, we probably have a tendency to over communicate, and you'll know that you're over communicating if every single meeting you hop on and you're just talking about the same stuff and nothing is changing and you run out of things to talk about halfway through the meeting. Cool. That's indicating data that says we can probably dial the frequency back. So it's a frustrating answer, I know, Erik, but the reality is I do think it depends. The question is just, do you have a meeting? This is the important part, I think. Do you have a meeting that is set aside for each layer of the business that you're looking at? I draw two layers. We've got the tactical layer and the strategic layer. Tactical is everything you would think about. It's tasks, it's to-dos, it's looking at metrics and making sure that the right work is getting done. Strategic is where we're asking ourselves really big, crunchy questions and making sure that there is time carved out to really think about and debate and answer those questions. And when I say like rate of change, these things change at different rates. You might have a lot of tactical work happening, and so you need to have more tactical meetings. Versus strategy just stays the same and stays consistent, and we can have a once a month strategic, and that works great for us. Or it's the end of the year and we need to set a new strategy for 2025. Cool. We're going to increase the rate of our strategic meetings, and we're going to maybe dial back tactical because it's the holidays and nobody's doing anything anyway, right? So again, I would advise that you not get locked in, and instead you just think critically, tactical and strategic. What's the rate of change within this component of the business? And do we have a meeting schedule that aligns with that?
So as you start to work with entrepreneurs, do you see a common theme with some of them having a bunch of tactical meetings and not strategic, or vice versa?
Yeah, the common theme that I see is that there's no separation of the two. And you've probably experienced this where you hop on a meeting and you're there to talk about like some really big, important thing that's coming up, some big decision that needs to be made. And then 30 minutes later, you're like, wait, but we're like talking about this client fire that cropped up this morning. And this is not what we were here to talk about, but it's just the most urgent thing. And now our whole meeting has been sidetracked. Or vice versa, where you're like, hey, we're here to just like talk about some stuff and figure out what we're doing this week. And then my visionary comes in with this bold new idea for how we're going to take over the market in 2025. And now we're just talking about that. We haven't gotten anything done, right? So the key is actually just separating them. You have tactical meetings and we have an agenda that goes with tactical meetings and keeps them on track. And then we have strategic meetings, which is where the agenda is more around discussion and debate and decision-making. And that is an entirely separate meeting on the calendar. Just by separating those two, both meetings are going to become way more effective and way more productive.
Company culture team culture. You even mentioned something about, what did you mention? Happiness score. You
Yeah,
say
sure. Employee happiness. Yep.
So I guess start with employee happiness, and where does company culture, vivid vision, all that stuff kind of come into play?
I love this, Eric. We are covering a lot of ground right now.
I know we are.
So company, this feels like a fun operations pop quiz. Like
you're talking and giving so much good stuff, and that just leads me to like the next thing. So I'm just trying to get as much as I can out of you.
I love it. I love it. Okay, beautiful. So company culture. I like to think of company culture as what happens when you're not looking. And I think this is particularly true for franchisors because you're rarely looking, right? What does your team do when no manager is around? How do they show up? How do they treat that client? How do they, make that hard decision? Culture is what is going to give them guidance when no one's given them guidance. And so you have an opportunity as the builder and designer of culture, which is how do I want people to show up when I'm not there? Building that into your culture is what is going to turn culture into a mechanism for growth. You can strategically design it to create an environment where people show up the way that you want them to. Versus what I see with most culture, which is that it's done pretty organically, kind of haphazardly. Like we have the culture that we have and we don't really know how we got it, but here it is and everybody seems pretty happy. So I guess we'll just keep going with this. But there's no intentional strategy behind that. And so when shit hits the fan and no one is there to tell you, here's how you be and here's how you show up, it's unreliable. It comes down to the individual and just who they are, what they think, and how they're going to handle it. And so you lose control in the most important moment of the business, the moment that shit has hit the fan and you are not there to tell somebody what to do, you lose control. And so culture is your opportunity to create some parameters around that. It's a strategic lever to pull in your business, and it's free. It's totally free to build a world-class culture. So why wouldn't you?
How do you find these people?
Okay.
these ops people. So a little context. I have a good audience out there. So I put out posts on social because we're always looking for like fractional C-level talent, or sometimes, we're just hiring for a CMO for one of my portfolio brands. So I put a post out there and I'm building this amazing database of mostly people that have jobs right now, but they are interested at what might be out there in the future. And so I get to talk to a lot of these folks and, recruit them for our portfolio brands. But let's say someone doesn't have access to somebody like me, or they're not using someone like you to go out there and find them, which I think that that's a hugely valuable service, first of all. But how someone just wants to do it on their own, how do they go find some good ops people?
Yeah, the facetious answer would be just work with somebody like me that knows how to do it and we can do it for you, or we have a do-it-yourself version of our exact same hiring system and you can just do that.
Let me just say, like, people listening, that is like, there's people that do that for franchisees, hiring staff for your fitness franchise, like fitness staff. There are people out there that do that in franchise, and there are people out there that do that here, like with Spyglass. Like, you should be hiring somebody because it takes so much time and energy. And I know this because I do it for our brands, and they probably don't even understand what all that goes into it, but there's so much value in that. And I'll say this, I have other people that I go to for some of these positions that we will pay them to do it if they don't come from my own network, and my brands find that valuable. So when I go out and find amazing ops people or C-level talent, I'm going to my network, but I'm also going outside of that and paying somebody else for it. So I think that is something that most franchisees and franchisors undervalue. So they should be reaching out to you first and foremost.
Well, and I'll throw some numbers behind that, Eric, because the average cost of a mishire at the management and leadership level is somewhere between 5 and 15x their annual salary, right? If we're talking about the operator for a franchise location, they are running that location. They are making 80% of all of the most critical decisions. They're building the team. They are the change agent that is either going to turn that into a massive success or run it into the ground. And so the cost of getting the hire wrong is astronomical, because it's not just the cost of the mishire and that's annoying, and now we have to replace that person. It's all of the growth that could have happened in that same amount of time, that 6 months or 12 months that it took you to figure it out. That is growth that could have happened if you'd had the right person in the role. So the opportunity cost, both positive and negative, is extreme. And that's why, we didn't always offer recruiting. It's something that we layered in down the road, only because so many people were asking for it. And we had people where we would, their operator would be with them for years, and then they would leave. And with that left all of this potential growth for the business, and they had no recourse for bringing that person in again. And so, yes, just to echo what you're saying, the cost of a mishire is astronomical. Therefore, the cost of hiring somebody to reduce that risk is an investment. It's a risk mitigation investment.
Last question, job scorecard, finding your ideal operator. Do you have I think you have a job scorecard, something like that, right? Or am I completely off base here?
I do.
I thought I did
you're
some
totally
good
right.
research.
You asked, how do you hire people? The first step to hiring a good operator is to have a job scorecard around what your ideal operator looks like.
How do you start that job scorecard?
So there are templates. Actually, we have created templates. We've given these templates away. I'm happy to give them to your audience as well here, Erik. And the first thing that I would articulate is that there are 3 levels of operator, and you need to understand which operator you're hiring. You've got your entry-level operator. That's like an ops manager level hire. They're there to do day-to-day systems. They're not really building and running the team. They're there to just manage the operational infrastructure. You've got your head of operations. That is probably the territory we're stepping into for your franchisors and franchisees. They're running the show, the day-to-day. They're able to make that decision-making, but they're not a COO. And so many people hold off on hiring the COO because they think that that's their only option, and they don't want to drop $200K on a COO. Fair enough, right? But your individual location doesn't need a COO. That's not the level of operator that you need to bring in right now. You're looking for head of operations, an operator, general manager might be another word for them, right? Because they are qualified and skilled enough to lead, but they are not this crazy operational strategic thinker with 20 years of experience. And so save yourself the $100K in salary and hire the operator at the level that you actually need it. The first step to hiring successfully is to know which level of operator you're going for.
I would love to be able to give them that template. How do they get that template? Should I just put it in the show notes? Is that going to be the easiest thing to do?
Yep. I'll shoot you the link. I'll shoot you the head of operations job scorecard link. And that is a starting point, people. It is a template, and then you have to take it and adapt it from there.
Jhana, it's been great having you on. Thank you so much. And hope to meet you face to face one of these days in the mountains, like rock climbing or mountain biking or doing something cool.
We're just going to run into each other on the running trail, and I cannot wait for it, Erik. Thank you so much for having me on. This is really fun.
Thanks for listening to the Franchise Secrets podcast. Links to everything can be found over at franchisesecrets.com. And if you want my help with anything from starting your own franchise to growing your current franchise business, please visit scalablefranchise.com.